If you're born in the United States of America, you're an American, right? That's how it's always been. I mean, it's in the Constitution. But Donald Trump doesn't care about the Constitution, and he's been very open for a while about how he plans to end this core constitutional principle, end birthright citizenship.
You have people on the border, and in one day they walk over, have a baby, and now all of a sudden we're supposed to pay the baby.
So we are looking at birthright citizenship very seriously. It's frankly ridiculous.
On day one of my new term in office, I will sign an executive order making clear to federal agencies that under the correct interpretation of the law, going forward, the future children of illegal aliens will not receive automatic U.S. citizenship.
You heard that last part. Trump not only thinks he can take away a right explicitly outlined in the very first sentence of the 14th Amendment, which explicitly says, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States. But Trump being Trump, he thinks he can get rid of it all by himself, not via constitutional amendment, not even via Congress, but via executive order. Yes, our next president is planning on instructing government agencies to deny social security numbers, passports, and public benefits to newborn babies in the US whose parents don't provide proof of their immigration status. But here's the thing. Birthright citizenship isn't just explicitly laid out in the Constitution, it's also been explicitly upheld by the Supreme Court. In fact, the relevant precedent here is over 100 years old. Yes, back in 1898, birthright citizenship took center stage at the Supreme Court after Wong Kim Ark, who was born to two Chinese immigrants in San Francisco, had his citizenship challenged by the xenophobic Chinese Exclusion Act, which at the time banned Chinese immigrants from becoming naturalized citizens. Nevertheless, in US versus Wong Kim Ark, the Supreme Court upheld his citizenship, despite him being born to non-citizens, writing that, quote, the 14th Amendment affirms the ancient and fundamental rule of citizenship by birth within the territory. Now, of course, the current conservative majority on the Supreme Court doesn't have a great track record when it comes to upholding precedent or constitutional rights for that matter. And with justices like Amy Coney Barrett, who once referred to the 14th Amendment as, quote, possibly illegitimate, it's not crazy to think that this court may well give Trump their stamp of approval on this issue, which, to be clear, would be a shocking and shameless disregard for the Constitution. And don't just take my word for it. Even James Ho, a conservative lawyer turned Trump-appointed judge, wrote in 2009 that, quote, text, history, judicial precedent, and executive branch interpretation confirmed that the citizenship clause reaches most US-born children of aliens, including illegal aliens. Now, as plain and obvious as the 14th Amendment is, when it comes to birthright citizenship, there are four words in the middle of that first sentence that Team Trump thinks supports their case against birthright citizenship. It's the bit where it says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to jurisdiction thereof are citizens. Conservatives argue that part, subject to jurisdiction thereof, was written in order to deny citizenship to anyone who still has loyalty to a foreign power, which they say includes people whose parents have not entered the country legally. But this isn't the mic drop they think it is. When the 14th Amendment was being passed back in the 1860s, the senators debating it pretty much all agreed that it would apply to pretty much everyone, including the children of foreign citizens with loyalty to other countries, but excluding Native Americans on reservations. Congress agreed to adopt the interpretation of Senator Jacob M. Howard, the author of the Citizenship Clause, who clarified the jurisdiction language, saying that it meant birthright citizenship would not apply to, quote, persons born in the United States who are foreigners, aliens who belong to the families of ambassadors or foreign ministers, but will include every other class of persons. When Senate Judiciary Chair Lyman Trumbull was asked if birthright citizenship applied to kids of Chinese immigrants, he said back then, undoubtedly. So conservatives say they're originalists, that the Constitution should be interpreted in accordance with the original historical era in which it was written. And the senators at that time were clear that birthright citizenship applied to the kids of all foreigners with the exception of foreign diplomats. Oh, and remember US versus Wong Kim Ark? That case also addressed this jurisdiction language head on, with Supreme Court Justice Horace Gray writing for the majority that the amendment's language, quote, was not intended to impose any new restrictions upon citizenship. Gray then confirmed that the language was only intended to exclude children born to Native Americans living on reservations, children of foreign diplomats, and, based on English common law, quote, children born of alien enemies in hostile occupation. So, okay, that jurisdiction language was also intended to exclude children of literal military invaders, which partly explains why Trump and the GOP have been so desperately and so falsely and so ridiculously trying to brand migrants at the southern border as invaders. Conservatives also like to point to the fact that in the Wong Kim Ark case, Ark's parents were immigrants living here legally, whereas Trump's executive order would only go after children whose parents are undocumented. But once again, judicial precedent is not on Trump's side. Take a look at Plyler versus Doe, 1982. The Supreme Court struck down a public school in Texas's attempt to deny admission to undocumented children, saying, and I quote, no plausible distinction with respect to 14th Amendment jurisdiction can be drawn between resident aliens whose entry into the United States was lawful and resident aliens whose entry was unlawful. In other words, even if you are undocumented, you are still within the jurisdiction of the US, and therefore birthright citizenship as laid out in the 14th Amendment still applies to your kids. And yet Donald Trump thinks that's a, quote, ridiculous idea.
Now, how ridiculous. We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits.
For starters, that's not true. Over 30 countries, including Canada right next door to us, also have birthright citizenship. But even if we were the only country in the world that offered it, so what? Isn't American exceptionalism what this country is all about? Isn't that what's supposed to make America great?